The house Daniel built. I never thought I'd sit in a courtroom across from my own son, watching his lawyer point at me like I was a stranger who'd broken into my own life. My name is Daniel Whitfield. I am 68 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my son Marcus filed a petition asking a judge to strip me of the deed to the house I built with my own hands, the house where his mother took her last breath, the house where he learned to walk, the house that had my blood, sweat, and 30 years of mortgage payments soaked into every board of its frame. He didn't ask me first. He didn't call. I found out from a certified letter that arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was watering the tomatoes Elena used to grow before the cancer took her 4 years ago. I remember standing on the porch, hose still running over the fence, reading the words petition for conservatorship and transfer of real property until they stopped making sense. By the time I got to the courthouse that first day, I understood exactly what was happening. My son believed I had lost my mind, or worse, he was betting that a judge would believe it, whether it was true or not. The boy I raised. Let me tell you about Marcus before I tell you what happened in that courtroom, because you need to understand what it cost me to sit there and listen to strangers discuss my mental competence like I was a piece of furniture being appraised. Elena and I built this house in 1994. I was an electrician, she taught 3rd grade, and between us we scraped together a down payment that would make a modern buyer laugh. We poured the foundation ourselves with a rented mixer. I wired every outlet by hand. Elena painted the nursery yellow before we even knew if the baby would be a boy or a girl, because she said yellow was a color that didn't need permission to be happy. Marcus was born in that house's 2nd year. He grew up climbing the oak tree in the backyard, breaking his arm off the tire swing when he was 9, bringing home a girlfriend named Priya at 17, who Elena adored instantly, and I was slower to warm to, mostly because I was terrified of him growing up at all. He was a good kid. I want to say that clearly because everything that follows might make you doubt it, and I don't want you to. He was generous with his allowance. He cried at his grandmother's funeral longer than anyone. He called his mother every Sunday even after he moved 3 states away for work. But somewhere in his 30s, something shifted. I don't know if it was the divorce or the business that failed or the friends he started keeping, men I met maybe twice who had watches too expensive for men who talked about opportunities instead of jobs. Whatever it was, my son who used to send flowers on my birthday started sending different kinds of messages. Messages about investments, about helping him get back on his feet, about numbers that grew larger each time we spoke. I helped where I could. Elena, before she passed, made me promise to always help him, and I meant to keep that promise even after grief made everything harder to carry. But there is a difference between helping your son and being slowly, quietly drained by him, and it took me longer than it should have to see which one was happening. The last straw, though I didn't know it was the last straw at the time, came 8 months ago when Marcus visited for what he called a family conversation. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table Elena and I bought secondhand in 1996, and told me he thought it would be smart, for estate planning purposes, if I signed the house over to him now. He had papers already printed. He had a pen ready. I said no, not because I didn't trust him, or maybe partly because I didn't, though I wasn't ready to admit that yet, but because Elena and I had already decided years before exactly how the house would pass to him through the will after I was gone. There was no reason to rush it. I told him that gently. I told him I loved him and the house would be his one day, but not today, and not by signing something at a kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon. He didn't argue, he just nodded, folded the papers back into his bag, and left earlier than planned. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't, it was the beginning. The petition. The petition Marcus filed didn't ask for the house outright. That would have been too obvious, too easy to see through. Instead, it asked the court to appoint him as my conservator, arguing that I was showing signs of significant cognitive decline and was vulnerable to poor financial decision-making and therefore unable to manage my own affairs, including the property. Attached to the petition was an affidavit from a doctor I had never heard of, claiming to have reviewed my medical history and concluding I likely suffered from early-stage dementia. There was also a statement from a neighbor, Carl, who I'd waved to maybe a dozen times in the last 2 years, describing an incident where I supposedly forgot to turn off my sprinklers for 3 days straight, something that never happened, though I do recall Carl once telling me his own sprinklers had broken. The most damning piece, the one that made my stomach drop when I read it, was a printed email exchange, supposedly between me and Marcus, where I had written that I was scared, that I couldn't remember things, that I wanted him to take over before something bad happens. I had never written those words. I don't even use that email account anymore. I switched providers 2 years ago and told Marcus so myself, in a phone call, which meant he knew that account was essentially abandoned and available to be filled with whatever he needed it to say. My lawyer, a sharp, tired woman named Renata Cole, who took my case because her own father had gone through something similar, told me the strategy plainly. They're not trying to prove you're incompetent. They're trying to make it look expensive and embarrassing for you to prove you're not. A lot of people just give up the property rather than fight. I'm not giving up my house, I told her. Then we go to court, she said, and we go prepared. The hearing. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, fluorescent lights. A judge named Harriet Okafor who had the kind of face that gave nothing away, which I found both unsettling and, eventually, reassuring. Marcus sat at the other table. He wouldn't look at me directly, which told me more than anything his lawyer said that morning. His attorney, a smooth-talking man named Griggs, opened by painting a picture of a loving, worried son forced into an impossible position by a father whose mind was slipping away from him, piece by piece, like sand through a fist. They called their doctor first, the one whose affidavit I'd read weeks earlier. Under questioning, he admitted, somewhat sheepishly, that he had never actually examined me in person. His conclusions were based entirely on a phone consultation with Marcus and documents Marcus had provided. Renata made sure that fact was said slowly, clearly, twice for the record. Then came Carl, the neighbor, who under gentle cross-examination admitted he wasn't entirely sure whose sprinklers had malfunctioned that week, and that Marcus had called him beforehand to just check in and see how I was doing since Marcus was worried. I watched the judge's expression shift, almost imperceptibly, from neutral to something sharper. Then Griggs did something I hadn't expected. He called Marcus to the stand himself. Marcus testified with his voice cracking at exactly the right moments. He described a father who left the stove on, who repeated stories within the same conversation, who had grown paranoid and reclusive since his wife's death. Some of it strung because there were fragments of truth buried in it. Grief had changed me. I had grown quieter. I did sometimes tell the same story twice because I lived mostly alone with my memories now. But the picture he painted was a caricature built from real clay, twisted into a shape that served his petition rather than the truth. When Renata rose to cross-examine her own client's son, I felt my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. She didn't attack him. She asked simple, careful questions. Marcus, when did you last visit your father's home in person, prior to filing this petition? He hesitated. It's been a while, maybe 8 months. 8 months, Renata repeated, letting the number sit in the air. And in that time, did you ever request a video call to observe your father's condition directly? No. Did you ever ask him to see a doctor together, in person, to have an actual, in-person evaluation done? No, Thank you, she said and sat back down. I saw the judge write something on her notepad. Then it was my turn. What I revealed. Renata had prepared me for this moment for weeks. She told me, answer plainly, don't get emotional, let the facts speak. I had every intention of following her advice. But when Griggs stood up to cross-examine me, something in his posture, that easy, practiced confidence, the look of a man who believed he had already won, made a decision for me before I consciously made it myself. Mr. Whitfield, Griggs began, isn't it true you've had difficulty managing your own bills in the last year? No, I said. You've never missed a payment, never forgotten anything. I paused, then I reached into my jacket pocket, a motion Renata hadn't planned for, and I saw her stiffen slightly beside me and pulled out a small voice recorder. Not a phone, an actual recorder, the kind you buy at an electronics store, because Elena always said the truth deserves something you couldn't accidentally delete with a swipe of your thumb. Your Honor, I said, looking at Judge Okafor rather than Griggs, may I explain something before I answer that question? She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Go ahead, Mr. Whitfield. About 7 months ago, I said, my son visited me and asked me to sign the house over to him. I said no because his mother and I had already planned for him to inherit it properly through the will. He left that day upset, though he didn't show it much. But I've learned, over 68 years, that when someone leaves upset without saying why, it's usually because you've said no to something they really needed to hear yes to. I clicked the recorder on. So the next time he called me, which was about 2 weeks later, I recorded the conversation. I want to say I'm not proud of doing that to my own son, but I had a feeling, and I've learned to trust my feelings more since Elena passed, because she isn't here anymore to trust them alongside me. The room had gone quiet in a way courtrooms rarely go quiet, not the practiced hush of procedure, but something more alert, more human. I pressed play. The recording was short, maybe 90 seconds, but every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. It was Marcus's voice, unmistakably saying, "Dad, look, I've got guys I owe money to, real money, and if I don't figure something out, they're going to make my life very difficult. The house is basically going to be mine anyway eventually. Why does it matter if we just move the paperwork now instead of waiting for you to?" A pause, you know what I mean. And then my own voice from the recording, saying, "Are you asking me to give you my house to pay off a gambling debt?" And Marcus, quieter, "I wouldn't call it gambling, it's complicated." The recorder clicked off. I looked up. Griggs had stopped moving entirely. Marcus's face had drained of color, his eyes fixed somewhere on the table in front of him, refusing to meet anyone's gaze, not the judge's, not his lawyer's, not mine. "I kept that recording," I continued, my voice steadier than I expected, "not because I wanted to use it against my son. I kept it because I was scared that one day I'd need proof that I wasn't the one losing my grip on reality. And I want the court to know I love my son. I have loved him every single day of his life, including today, sitting in this room. But loving someone doesn't mean handing them the keys to burn down the one thing that's still standing from the life I built with his mother." Judge Okafor was silent for a long moment. Then she asked, quietly, "Is there anything else you'd like to submit, Mr. Whitfield?" "Yes, Your Honor," I nodded to Renata, who produced a folder. 6 months ago, out of concern for exactly this kind of dispute, I underwent a full cognitive evaluation with Dr. Sandra Liu at Memorial Neurological Associates, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted an honest answer for myself before anyone else tried to give one for me. The results are in that folder. I scored within the normal range for my age, with no signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. Griggs, to his credit, tried to recover. "Your Honor, this recording could have been taken out of context, edited." "It wasn't edited," Renata interjected calmly. "We are happy to submit the recorder itself, along with a forensic audio analysis, if the court requires it." The judge held up a hand, silencing him. She looked at Marcus for a long moment, not unkindly, but with the weariness of someone who had seen this particular kind of grief-shaped greed before, dressed up in legal paperwork. "Mr. Whitfield the younger," she said, "do you have anything you'd like to say?" Marcus was quiet for so long I thought he might refuse to speak at all. When he finally did, his voice was small, nothing like the confident testimony from an hour before. "I made a mistake," he said. "I got desperate, and I convinced myself it wasn't really lying if it meant fixing things before they got worse. I'm sorry, Dad." I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't forgive him, some part of me, the part that remembered him at 9 years old with a broken arm, already had. But some things need to be said in a hallway after a hearing, not across a courtroom in front of a judge who still has a ruling to make. After Judge Okafor denied the petition in full. She noted for the record that the medical affidavit was unreliable, the neighbor's testimony was coached, and the email evidence appeared fabricated, a finding that opened its own can of legal consequences for Marcus, consequences I did not push for, though the court considered them on its own. Outside the courthouse, Marcus was waiting by my car. I almost didn't stop. Part of me wanted to walk past him, get in, and drive home to a quiet house that, for the first time in months, actually felt like it was still mine. But I stopped. "I'm not going to pretend everything's fine," I told him. "You tried to take something from me by convincing the world I was disappearing. That's not something I forget easily." "I know," he said, his eyes were red. "I don't expect you to forgive me today." "I'm not asking you to leave either," I said. "There's a difference between not forgiving someone and refusing to see them again. I loved your mother for 30 years, and she'd want me to leave a door open for you, even a small one. We didn't hug, we didn't fix a decade of slow drifting in a parking lot. But he called me the following Sunday, the way he used to, and it wasn't about money or paperwork or anything except how I was sleeping and whether the tomatoes had come in yet. They had. Elena's yellow nursery is a home office now, and the oak tree in the backyard has a new tire swing I put up for a grandson who doesn't exist yet, but who I hope will, someday, climb it the way his father once did, in a house that is still, against every effort to take it from me, entirely mine." The room went silent that day in court because for a moment, the truth was louder than the lie that had been rehearsed for months. And truth, I've learned, doesn't need to shout, it just needs a chance to be heard.